Behavior precedes motivation. This idea is not just motivational fluff. It is rooted in the fundamental architecture of the human nervous system. We tend to assume that in order to take action, we must first feel motivated. But the reality, confirmed by research in neuroscience and psychology, is that action often comes before motivation, not the other way around. Waiting to feel ready, waiting to feel confident or energized. These are modern traps that lead to inertia, procrastination, and ultimately underperformance. The human brain is designed to respond to behavior with neurochemical changes. One of the most critical systems involved here is the dopaminergic system, particularly circuits that begin in the ventral tegmental area, VTA, and project to the nucleus accumbens, prefrontal cortex, and other regions involved in motivation and goal-directed behavior. Dopamine, often misunderstood as the pleasure chemical, is more accurately described as the motivation or pursuit chemical. It surges not when we succeed, but when we are in pursuit of something meaningful. What triggers these surges? Not passivity, not planning endlessly in your head. What triggers dopamine is the actual act of taking steps, physical or mental, toward a goal. The moment you start moving, even a small step, your brain recognizes that forward motion and dopamine begins to rise. That rise reinforces the behavior, telling your system, this is the correct direction, keep going. This explains why you might feel completely unmotivated at the start of a task, yet find yourself fully engaged 10 or 15 minutes into it. The motivation didn't precede the task, it emerged from it. In this way, behavior becomes the on-ramp to neurochemical changes that create the state we call motivation. This principle has huge implications for how we begin our week, particularly on Mondays. Many people dread Mondays because they perceive them as stressful or overwhelming, but in reality, the problem is not the day. It's the lack of intentional action that sets a positive cascade in motion. If you wake up and immediately check your phone, lie in bed, or mentally complain about the workload ahead, your body and brain receive signals of stagnation and helplessness. Cortisol, your primary stress hormone, may rise uncontrollably, while dopamine and epinephrine remain low, leading to a state of fatigue, anxiety, and mental fog. Contrast that with what happens when you take immediate action. For example, getting out of bed and performing even 1 minute of movement, such as walking or dynamic stretching, activates somatic motor circuits in the spinal cord and brainstem. This action increases the release of epinephrine, adrenaline, which raises your alertness. Even more importantly, that movement provides a signal to the rest of the brain that the system is online, active, and ready to go. The brain takes cues from what the body does. If your behavior is passive, the brain assumes there is no need for alertness. If your behavior is forward moving, the brain boosts your attentional and motivational systems to match that. This is why starting before you feel ready is the master key to progress. It may feel uncomfortable, your thoughts might tell you to wait, but when you override those reflexive signals and take just one small step, whether it's writing a single sentence, walking for 5 minutes, or organizing your desk, you initiate a chain reaction that alters your entire internal state. Over time, this practice reconfigures your identity. You go from being someone who needs motivation to act to someone who acts and thereby generates motivation. That shift is powerful. It means you no longer rely on external conditions, mood, or perfect circumstances. You've trained your brain to respond to movement with reward, to action with clarity, and to forward momentum with purpose. So remember this: motivation is not the spark that ignites behavior. Behavior is the spark that ignites motivation. The more consistently you embody this, the more resilient, focused, and self-directed you become, not just on Mondays, but every single day of your life. How you begin your week, specifically the state you're in when Monday starts, profoundly impacts your performance, decision-making, focus, and emotional stability for the rest of the week. This isn't just about mindset in a vague or abstract way. It's about neurophysiology, the exact biological state your brain and body are in when you enter the first moments of a new week. That state determines how you perceive challenges, how well you regulate emotions, and how effectively you use your cognitive resources. The human brain operates in different states based on the balance of neuromodulators such as dopamine, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, cortisol, and serotonin. These chemicals are not just associated with moods or feelings, they dictate your ability to process information, maintain attention, regulate emotional responses, and make good decisions under pressure. If you begin your Monday in a chaotic or distracted state, such as one marked by fatigue, digital overwhelm, or emotional reactivity, your brain will set a tone of mental fog, impulsiveness, and low resilience. This creates a kind of negative inertia that makes the rest of the week feel harder than it needs to be. Now, contrast that with beginning your Monday in a calm but alert state, a state where your nervous system is awake, present, and focused. From a biological perspective, this means you've activated the sympathetic nervous system just enough to be energized, but you're also engaging the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, focus, and self-regulation. In this state, the brain is more efficient at filtering distractions, setting priorities, and executing tasks with clarity. You feel on. You respond to stressors with control rather than reacting emotionally. The key is that your state is trainable. It is not something you have to leave up to chance or circumstance. You can design your state with simple tools, particularly in the first 30 to 60 minutes of your day. One of the most powerful and accessible methods is to expose your eyes to natural light within minutes of waking. This light input sends a strong signal to your suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus, which governs your internal biological clock, or circadian rhythm. This helps coordinate hormone release, particularly cortisol, which rises naturally in the morning and gives you energy and focus when properly timed. The problem arises when we override our biology by starting the week with artificial inputs that confuse these systems. If you wake up, stay in the dark, scroll on your phone, and feed your brain unpredictable information, news, notifications, emails, you disrupt your natural alertness signals and introduce stress in a disorganized way. Cortisol still rises, but not in sync with light, movement, or purpose. It rises with anxiety, which can dysregulate your emotional systems and impair your prefrontal cortex's ability to plan effectively. Another critical element of state control is movement. Low-intensity physical movement early in the day activates the motor circuits of the brain and sends a message to the body that it's time to engage with the external world. Movement also stimulates the release of epinephrine and dopamine, further enhancing your capacity for sustained attention and learning. When you pair light, movement, and intentional focus, you create an internal landscape of clarity, control, and momentum. This directly influences how you experience the rest of the week. Instead of reacting to problems as they arise, you anticipate them with a clear mind. Instead of wasting cognitive energy managing emotional noise, you direct that energy towards solving meaningful problems. We are often taught to think about goals, strategies, and productivity as abstract skills, but all of those rest upon a foundation, your physiological and psychological state. That foundation is highly sensitive to how you start your week. The way you breathe, move, focus, and orient yourself in the first moments of Monday sends signals to every system in your body. Are we in survival mode, or are we in pursuit mode? Are we reacting to life, or are we building it? That's why beginning your week in the right state is not optional. It's essential. Your state shapes your outcomes. Change your state, and you change the trajectory of your entire week. Your ability to thrive during the week, to stay focused, make wise decisions, and navigate stress, depends largely on how well your prefrontal cortex can manage your emotional brain. This is not just about staying calm or thinking positively. It's about engaging in a deliberate process of cortical control over reactive emotional systems. The brain is hierarchically organized. At the top is the prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive functions, planning, reasoning, suppressing impulses, and aligning behavior with long-term goals. Below that are older brain structures like the amygdala and hypothalamus that are involved in emotional reactions, fear responses, and survival-based decision-making. In a very real sense, beginning your week with intentional cortical engagement allows you to lead your emotional systems instead of being led by them. When your emotional systems dominate, especially under stress or fatigue, you're more likely to act impulsively, become reactive, or fixate on minor problems. This is because the amygdala is trained to detect threats, often overestimating their danger in modern life. A full inbox or an unexpected meeting can be perceived as a threat, and without cortical regulation, the body reacts with elevated cortisol, heart rate, and mental rumination. In this state, you lose cognitive flexibility, your options narrow, you might make poor decisions, avoid necessary tasks, or lash out in ways that sabotage your progress. Now, contrast that with what happens when the prefrontal cortex is actively engaged. When you are in a deliberate state of planning, introspection, and purpose, you gain access to higher order thinking. You can reflect instead of react. You can delay gratification, weigh multiple options, and tolerate uncertainty. These are not just psychological traits. They are neural processes that require energy and focus, and they are trainable. This is why it's so important to begin your week in a way that activates these executive systems. One practical way to do this is to insert intentional reflection and structure into your Monday morning. Before you let the world impose demands on you, take 5 to 10 minutes to define your top goals. Not everything you need to do, just the most essential 1 or 2 priorities. When you do this, you activate goal-setting networks in the brain and reduce the influence of emotional noise. Research shows that writing down goals improves activation in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for cognitive control and action planning. Simply identifying what matters most reduces your vulnerability to distraction. Breathing techniques can also support cortical control. Slow, deliberate breathing, particularly nasal inhales with slightly longer exhales, engages the parasympathetic nervous system. This lowers your heart rate, reduces anxiety signals from the body, and allows the prefrontal cortex to maintain control. In this state, emotional reactivity decreases, and your capacity for thoughtful response, these are not abstract skills. They are measurable shifts in brainwave activity and functional brain connectivity. What's also important is recognizing that emotional reactivity is not inherently bad. Emotions are useful data. The problem occurs when you confuse emotional urgency with factual importance. Just because something feels intense doesn't mean it's what you should focus on. Cortical control allows you to pause, assess, and then decide. This becomes especially vital in the first few hours of a Monday, when small decisions often spiral into large consequences. A reactive mindset early in the day can make the whole week feel disorganized, while a regulated mindset sets the tone for clear, productive action. Another layer to this is neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself. Every time you override a reflexive emotion with thoughtful action, you reinforce pathways in the prefrontal cortex. Over time, this makes you more resilient. You begin to automate discipline and calm under pressure. But this only happens with consistent practice, especially during moments of tension. So when your week starts to feel chaotic, that's not a signal to shut down. It's an invitation to activate cortical control, to breathe, reframe, and re-engage your executive systems. Training your brain to begin the week with intentional, top-down control is one of the most powerful habits you can build. It creates a neurological advantage, one where clarity replaces confusion, purpose replaces panic, and thoughtful action replaces reactivity. That is how you move from surviving your week to mastering it. Your body and brain are governed by patterns, biological rhythms, chemical signals, and predictable circuits that prepare you for either rest or action. One of the most effective ways to align these systems for optimal performance is by engaging 3 fundamental tools in the early part of your day: sunlight, movement, and breathwork. These are not motivational tricks or productivity hacks. They are deeply rooted in how your nervous system evolved to interpret the environment and regulate energy, focus, and alertness. Using them each week, especially on Monday mornings, gives you the neurological upper hand to approach your tasks with clarity and momentum. Let's start with sunlight. When light enters the eyes, specifically when it strikes the intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, a signal is sent directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, SCN, in the hypothalamus. This area acts as your central circadian clock. When this light signal arrives early in the day, especially within the first 30 to 60 minutes of waking, it triggers a coordinated biological cascade. Cortisol is released in a healthy, time-appropriate spike, melatonin is suppressed, and signals are sent to increase wakefulness and energy. This is not psychological, it is biological. Light exposure tells your body, the day has begun, it's time to move. Failing to get this signal leads to circadian confusion. Your energy remains low, your alertness is delayed, and your sleep that night is often disrupted. This is why staring at screens or staying in dark rooms in the morning throws your system off balance. Artificial light, even bright indoor bulbs, lacks the spectrum and intensity needed to properly time your internal clock. Natural sunlight, even on cloudy days, provides this reset signal with precision. Next is movement. Physical activity, especially in the morning, stimulates several beneficial neurochemicals. One of the most important is epinephrine, also known as adrenaline. When you begin to move, whether it's a walk, a short workout, or even simple stretching, your brainstem begins to signal for increased alertness and energy. At the same time, dopamine is released in moderate levels, which increases motivation, mood, and your capacity to focus. These systems were built for survival. Movement has always signaled a transition from rest to action in evolutionary terms. When you use this principle deliberately, you gain a chemical advantage that aligns with high performance. Movement also activates mechanoreceptors in your muscles and joints, sending signals back to the brain that reinforce alertness. This is why even light physical activity has a profound impact on cognitive readiness. If you sit idle and passive in the early hours of your day, especially at the start of the week, your nervous system will remain in a low energy, low focus mode, making everything feel harder and more overwhelming. Then comes breathwork. The way you breathe is not just a response to your emotional state. It is a direct influence on it. Rapid, shallow breathing can increase anxiety and trigger sympathetic nervous system dominance, but slow, deliberate breathing, especially through the nose with extended exhales, activates the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. This calms the heart, lowers blood pressure, and enhances prefrontal cortical activity, meaning your decision-making and focus improve. Techniques like the physiological sigh, 2 quick inhales through the nose followed by a long exhale, have been shown to rapidly reduce stress and restore calm. This is not theoretical. These shifts can be measured in heart rate variability, skin conductance, and real-time brain activity. When combined, sunlight, movement, and breathwork create a trifecta of neurological priming. You're giving your system the cues it evolved to expect. Daylight signals time to engage, movement signals readiness to act, and breathwork signals control over internal state. This trifecta tells your brain, I am safe, alert, and ready to focus. That is a far more powerful message than the chaotic flood of notifications or mindless scrolling that often greets the modern person at the start of the week. You don't need hours to do this. 10 to 20 minutes of deliberate engagement with these tools can completely reshape your cognitive and emotional tone for the day and set the rhythm for your entire week. These aren't just wellness rituals, they are biological switches that govern your performance, resilience, and focus. By choosing to use them each Monday, you take control of your most valuable resource, your state, and from that state, everything else flows. The hypothalamus is one of the most important control centers in the brain. It plays a key role in regulating your body's internal state, your temperature, hunger, thirst, sleep-wake cycles, hormonal rhythms, and more. But what many people don't realize is that it also sets the emotional and physiological tone for how you approach each day. The hypothalamus listens to cues from the environment, light, temperature, movement, and food, and translates them into commands that affect the entire body. When you consistently send it the right cues at the beginning of the week, especially on Monday mornings, you establish a stable internal rhythm that enhances mental clarity, emotional stability, and physical energy. If those cues are inconsistent or chaotic, the hypothalamus receives mixed messages and your system ends up dysregulated, reactive, and unfocused. One of the most important signals the hypothalamus responds to is light, specifically natural sunlight in the morning. Light detected by the retina is sent to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, SCN. a structure inside the hypothalamus that functions as the master circadian clock. This clock coordinates timing signals to other systems in the body: when to release cortisol, when to raise body temperature, when to release melatonin at night, and when to suppress or activate certain hormones. The timing of this signal is critical. Early morning light exposure aligns your circadian rhythm with the natural day-night cycle, setting off a cascade of biological events that support focus, motivation, and emotional resilience. Delaying this signal by staying indoors, in darkness, or looking at screens confuses your internal timing system, leading to fatigue, brain fog, and mood instability throughout the week. The hypothalamus is also sensitive to patterns in behavior. If you wake up at the same time each day, expose yourself to light, move your body, and eat around consistent times, the hypothalamus learns that rhythm. It then optimizes hormonal release and autonomic nervous system balance to match that pattern. Cortisol rises in the morning in a healthy time-locked spike. Dopamine begins to pulse through the system to support motivation. Serotonin levels begin to rise, regulating mood and setting the stage for melatonin production later in the day. All of this leads to a system that is predictable, stable, and ready to perform. But if the week begins with inconsistent signals, waking up late, skipping light exposure, delaying food intake, or flooding the brain with digital noise, this internal clock becomes desynchronized, hormones are released at the wrong times, energy becomes erratic, and your mental state becomes harder to regulate. You feel out of sync, emotionally reactive, and mentally foggy, not because you lack discipline or motivation, but because your internal physiology is misaligned. The hypothalamus cannot do its job effectively without consistent inputs, especially at the beginning of the day. This is why it's essential to build anchoring routines that tell your hypothalamus the day is beginning. It's time to activate focus, energy, and drive. Morning light, movement, hydration, and even basic goal setting all act as time cues or zeitgates that allow the hypothalamus to calibrate the rest of your body's system. These routines don't need to be complicated. A consistent wake-up time, 5 to 10 minutes outside, some light stretching or walking, and a small, protein-rich meal can be enough to trigger the optimal cascade. The body craves rhythm. Your mental and physical performance is significantly better when your internal systems know what to expect. When the hypothalamus is given regular, structured input, it creates a foundation for all higher-level brain functions to operate smoothly. This includes memory, attention, problem-solving, emotional regulation, and motivation. In fact, many people who feel chronically disorganized or mentally fatigued are simply operating from a state of biological inconsistency, not from a lack of willpower. Beginning your week by setting the hypothalamus correctly means everything else flows with greater ease. You start the week grounded instead of scattered, clear instead of confused, and stable instead of reactive. And because the hypothalamus also governs adaptation to stress, this early stability makes it easier to navigate the inevitable challenges and unpredictability that the week will bring. You don't just feel more in control, you are more in control, because your body is aligned with your goals. When you understand this mechanism and use it deliberately, your performance stops being random and becomes a reflection of rhythm, consistency, and intelligent design. Progression is the ultimate reward system for the human brain. While people often associate motivation and satisfaction with achieving big goals or receiving external validation, neuroscience reveals something far more powerful and sustainable. It's the experience of moving forward, even in small steps, that drives real motivation and long-term fulfillment. This is because of how the brain's dopaminergic system works. Dopamine, the primary chemical associated with motivation, reward, and drive, is released not just when we succeed, but most strongly when we are actively pursuing a meaningful goal, when we're making progress. The dopaminergic circuits, particularly those originating in the ventral tegmental area, VTA, and projecting to the nucleus accumbens and prefrontal cortex, are designed to track movement toward goals. Every time you take an action that brings you closer to something you value, whether that's completing a task, organizing your day, learning a new skill, or even showing up consistently, the brain registers that progress and responds with a dopamine pulse. That pulse doesn't just make you feel good. It increases your energy, sharpens your focus, and strengthens your desire to continue. In this way, dopamine becomes a self-reinforcing feedback loop. Action creates reward, which fuels more action. This is why it is crucial to structure your week, and especially your Mondays, in a way that creates immediate, achievable momentum. Starting your week with a long, overwhelming to-do list or a vague sense of pressure doesn't activate the reward system effectively. In fact, it often does the opposite. The brain sees no clear path forward, dopamine levels remain low, and motivation collapses under the weight of uncertainty. But when you begin the week by identifying one or two key actions and completing them, you give your brain the signal it needs. We are making progress. That's when the dopamine flows. That's when your entire system begins to organize around the feeling of forward motion. Even small wins matter. The brain does not distinguish between a massive milestone and a well-defined microstep. It responds to clarity and completion. If you write a clear goal and complete a specific task within the first hour of your work week, no matter how small, you're triggering the same systems that would be activated by completing a much larger objective. Over time, these small, deliberate wins compound. They create a sense of mastery, control, and self-direction, which further boosts dopamine and solidifies productive habits. Progress also buffers against stress and distraction. When the brain is in a dopamine-driven state, it's less susceptible to emotional noise and external interference. You're more likely to stay on task, resist temptation, and handle challenges with resilience. This is not willpower, it's neurochemical focus, the result of progress acting as a guiding light for your brain's reward system. Conversely, when you feel stuck or aimless, stress feels louder, distractions seem more appealing, and your ability to regulate emotions declines. It's because dopamine levels drop, and the brain begins to seek stimulation or escape rather than direction. One of the most effective ways to sustain this momentum throughout the week is by tracking your progress visually or physically. Whether it's a checklist, journal, calendar, or digital app, recording what you complete gives the brain another cue that it's moving forward. Each checked box or crossed out task is not just organizational, it's a biological reward. It reinforces the sense of accomplishment and builds a habit loop around progress. Importantly, the pursuit of progress must be tied to meaningful goals. Random activity or excessive busyness won't activate the reward system in the same way. The brain is designed to respond to effort in the direction of something that matters to you. This is why values and vision are so critical. When you align your weekly structure with what you genuinely care about, whether it's health, creativity, contribution, or learning, each step feels significant and each win becomes fuel for deeper engagement. In essence, if you want to begin every week with power and clarity, don't wait for inspiration or hope for motivation. Create it. Define a clear, meaningful direction, take small but concrete steps, track those steps, and allow your brain to reward you with the momentum you need. Progress is not the byproduct of motivation, it is the source of it.